Yes, it's a famous verse. Tanturajan Marishes ti Pashu Budhim Imam Jahi. So he uses the word Pashu means animal, Pashu Budhi, animal intelligence. And so it's a bit of a cautionary reminder. And interestingly, this comes after volumes of instruction and a very high, deep, intimate, spiritual, esoteric truths. But in conclusion, because we have to remember, the beginning of this was that Parikshit Maharaj was cursed. Right? He is a king, and while serving his kingdom, and very advanced spiritually, so that means, by implication, he should never be overwhelmed by the senses. They were called Rajarshis, which is a combination of the word Raj, king, and Rishi. Rajarshi. So they were so advanced spiritually, it was practically like they were sages. They were as qualified as sages, but very active in their occupational duties, managing a kingdom. Anyway, surveying his kingdom, suddenly he's overwhelmed by thirst, right, which is not his normal position. That doesn't normally bring him to a state of upset. But this is to lay the groundwork for the beginning of the Kali Yuga, right? The age of quarrel and hypocrisy. So what happens? He goes by the ashram, and there's a sage there meditating, a Brahmin who's meditating, lost in meditation, meaning he's not very conscious of the external world. He's deeply conscious of the internal world. And the noteworthy point is, it's on account of deep absorption in the internal world that he's not outer directed. It's not that by self-abnegation, by renouncing the objective world, that he's gone deep internally. That's the conventional stereotype, but that's not what is being underscored in the Bhagavatam or such literature. But rather they're saying, on account of deep internal absorption, the result is the objective world becomes secondary and adjusted. Like in Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is saying, Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehina rasovarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. Arjun, they're having a discussion at this point about sense control. And he's saying, what's the point of controlling your senses if your mind is still obsessing over sense objects? It's actually a very interesting section. And in Prabhupada's purport to that, he says, it's better to be a sincere street sweeper than a charlatan meditator. Right? So he's saying, if the senses are controlled, but internally you're dwelling on them, it's like, what do we say? Intent is 9/10 of the law. We were speaking about this the other day. What qualifies something as karma is the mind is the seat of karma. It's not as much the action, but the internal motive. Just like in a criminal trial, when they have to, it's clear, both sides agree, let's say, both sides agree to what happened. The defense and what's the other side? The prosecuting attorney. They both agree to what happened. But what's going to determine culpability was motive. What was the person thinking at that time? That's going to make all the difference. Right? So in the Gita, Krishna says, just trying to renounce the objective world will prove futile in really subduing the senses or being misled by the senses. He's saying, but rather, rasovarjam rasopyasya param drishtva. We're back to the word rishi is encoded there. Param drishtva, superior experience. Superior experience. In the presence of a superior experience, automatically inferior experience retreats. That's the way. That's the best. A higher taste, lower taste vanishes. Drishtva, rishi, drishi, those who are seeing, experiencing the truth, they're not outer directed. So sometimes people will think, well, these ancient civilizations and culture were so advanced. How come they appear to be technologically primitive? Well, one way of looking at it is they were so inner directed that they only put the minimum effort in outer things. The old saying, simple living, high thinking. They didn't want to complicate unnecessarily their outer lives, is one way of looking at it. So this Brahmin, he's in the inner world. What does a Brahmin mean? But people ruled by Brahma, spiritual conception. That's what it means. Even though it's still a mundane position, it's the higher aspect of the mundane, but they're ruled by spiritual consideration. And what is spirit for the most part? That which cannot be seen. Right? So sometimes Guru Maharaj would joke and say, we are devotees of the invisible, right? Of that which you cannot see. What is beyond the grasp of ordinary people to see is clear to Brahmins. They can see it very easily. Just, there are many examples of that. What writers see, other people don't see. My photography teacher, she used to tell me about putting on your photographic eyes, right? Your camera at your side, but you go into your photographic mode. Sometimes she'd start the class, she'd look out the window and go, well, it looks like an F8 type of day. She'd start calling out apertures because she put on her photographic eyes. Right? When, in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna wants to reveal something extraordinarily spiritual to Arjuna, he's saying, you cannot see this with your present eyes. So, Dibya Chakshu, I'm going to give you divine eyes so that you can see this. Have a glimpse of infinite perspective. Sticking with the photography example, there's short depth of field, and then there's a depth of field called infinity. Right? And the short, what's before you is in focus, everything else is blurred, and infinite depth of field, everything is in focus. So there's a perspective, infinite perspective, that's sought out by spiritually progressive people. So that Brahmin, let's just say he's in that plane, so he's not mindful of what's going on externally. And Parikshit Maharaj approaches him for some water. He's overwhelmed by thirst. It's part of a play, a divine play, to bring about certain action. So being ignored by the sage, he becomes angry. Normally his anger is in control, but in this instance not. And with his bow, he saw a dead serpent lying nearby, and he drapes him like a mala, a garland, on that Brahmin. His son, right? Remember, the son of a Brahmin is not a Brahmin proper. They have to undergo sanskar to achieve that position. So this is supposedly the beginning of Kali Yuga, when the boy, seeing Emperor Parikshit insult his father, curses him, to die within 7 days by snake bird. Right? So that Parikshit Maharaj, he just took it in stride. He wasn't thinking, how can I get out of this? Is there some mantra I can chant? Maybe I can go see some Brahmins, we can reverse this. No, he accepted it. When he, although superficially it's unacceptable, by a deep reading of the environment, by a deep reading of circumstance, he saw something friendly in the background, which we hear advised in the Bhagavatam, Tatenu Kampam Susamikshmano. His name is Parikshit, means the examiner, one who examines things. Did that stop working? Anyway. Huh? Okay. Anyway, he examines things. Samiksha. Susamiksha means a deep level of examination. So, and it's meant to be some practical advice for us in life. Many things are going to happen that are not pleasing to us. Right? We're told, not a blade of grass moves without the will of God. It's not that not a blade of grass moves without my will. It's not a blade of grass moves without the will of God. There's some mysterious help in there that all movements are meant to please divinity. Suhridam sarvabhutanam gyatva mam shantim richtati. You want to be peaceful, then understand who's controlling everything is not your enemy, but your friend. So even superficially displeasing events from a deep level reading can be interpreted in a way that's spiritually progressive. So Parikshit Maharaj gives up his kingdom and he goes to fast. He's going to fast for 7 days until death. The news spreads not only all over the earth, but throughout the universe. And this is pre-digital. Right? So the greatest sages of all the different schools of theistic culture come to witness this event, that the great Emperor Parikshit, he's fasting until death. In 7 days he's been cursed, he'll give up his body. And he's inquiring from them what their advice is. And according to their realization, what was helpful to them in overcoming the mundane, they're giving that advice. So some are saying yoga, meditation, penance, austerity, giving in charity. They're naming all these different things that were helpful for them to walk through the mud and come out of the mud, right? Become spiritually realized. And he responds by saying, all these suggestions that you're making, they're all viable, they're valuable, but I could devote my whole life to any one of them, and I have 7 days. So if you could all meet and achieve a consensus and give me your unanimous verdict how I should proceed. At that time, Sukadeva Goswami, who you mentioned, he appears on the scene. And what are we told are his qualifications? When he appears there, he's a 16-year-old boy, he's totally naked, some children are chasing him or following him, calling him names, and so they think he's a madman. Right? And the description in the Bhagavatam, Gurudev liked to sing this from time to time, shows how beautiful he was. It describes his form, his complexion was like Krishna, His neck was like a conch shell, his waist, his whole body is described there. And Gurudev showed me once, was it one of the words there, how he pulled that word out to use in glorification of Guru Maharaj. Oh, and in terms of how it describes in Sanskrit poetry being naked, it says, Digambara, means he was dressed in the 10 directions. That's how it said. He was wearing the 10 directions. So that's Sukadev. The sages, although he's 16, he was legendary by that time, that within the womb of his mother, he was totally realized. Before he came out of the womb of his mother, he was a completely realized soul. And he came out in an advanced physiological position also. So that put him in a unique position, that he's not under the influence of the mundane. So whereas all these sages were giving advice from their perspective, when they saw him, we're told they were expert in the science of physiognomy. Just by seeing his form and his body, his movements, they could tell that he was a divine soul, divinely realized. So they elevated him to the presidential seat. And Parikshit Maharaj asked his question of him, that what is the duty of one in life, specifically for one who is about to die? And Sukadev's answer is that, says, my dear king, this question you're asking is a proper question, because it's not only beneficial for you, it's beneficial for everyone. Is it? Lokahitam Ripa Atmavit something, Atmavit something, Pungsang, saying it'll be good for everyone to hear the answer to this question. And then he begins his talk about that culminates in the pastimes of Krishna, Radharani, and Brajagopis. And we're told his qualification, what did he say? Parinistitopi Naragunye, Uttama Shloka Lilaya, Grihita Cheta Rajarse Akyanam Yadaditavan. I was situated in the Nirguna plane. Tamagun, Rajagun, Sattvagun, ignorance, passion, and goodness, the mundane qualities. He said, from the beginning, I was situated above them. He said, but from that position, I heard about the pastimes of Krishna and Radharani and Brajagopis, and I was heart and soul carried away to another world that I didn't know existed previously. And we're told by way of anecdotal evidence to the position of Sukadev that when he left the ashram of Vedavyas, that he went by a pond where it says some Guru Maharaj says Dibya Devis, divine damsels. They were bathing, totally naked, and when he walked by, they didn't bother to cover themselves. His father running after him, when he came by, they all covered themselves. And his father, Vedavyas, noticed that. He said, I don't understand. For me, you're out of shyness, covering yourself. For Sukadev, not. And they said, we can see in his eyes, he makes no discrimination in terms of mundane sexuality. The reason that just that small event is mentioned is because Sukadev, when he later says, I heard about the loving pastimes of Radha and Krishna and the Brajagopis, and I was carried away to another plane, to establish that he has no interest in mundane eroticism. So that's Sukadev, who it's almost 18,000 verses, first canto to the 12th canto, So he ultimately presents those pastimes to Parikshit Maharaj, and in conclusion in the 12th canto says, Tantarajan Marisheti Pashubudhi Imam Jahi. As it's getting nearer to Parikshit Maharaj's death, he's reminding him, fear of death is animal intelligence. You say, it's not like they think about it. That's not what it means. It's talking about the fear of dying, which they certainly experience. And in the Western parallel, we have Socrates, when the famous painting you can see, and the story where he's accepting the hemlock that is about to kill him, and he has his hand raised and he's saying, bring on the hemlock. My body will die, but I won't die. So that's considered the foundation of spiritual culture, understanding aham brahmasmi, I'm not the body, I'm the soul inhabiting the body, to deal in the subjective plane, to overcome attachment to the objective. That's what he's telling him. That same fear that we all possess. He's not saying we don't have it, but that fear that we have. He's saying that's the animals have that type of fear. You should at least achieve the position where you'll realize that you will sustain the death of the body. That we'll think, oh, that's a very advanced stage. Here, that's the very basis of theistic culture, right? Dehi nosmin yata dehe komaram jovanam jara tata dehantara prapti dhiras tatra namuyati. What does Krishna say in the Bhagavad Gita? That the soul embodied, we mentioned Sukadev, embodied in an embryo, embodied in a baby. On the way over here, we saw the little children, the toddlers, also embodied. Later they'll grow and develop into children and the teenagers into adults. What's consistent is the soul, Atma, the person. Right? The body will change. That's Krishna's point. He's saying the soul in this way is actually demonstrating its ability to sustain the change of body. That is the point that he's making. Because we say, well, how could that be possible? He's saying, he's giving an example, saying, you've already done it so many times in this life. What did we used to hear previously? That the body underwent a total change of cells every 7 years or so. So he's giving an example that's within your experience. Saying, just as you were in the body of an embryo, a baby, a child, etc. But then he's adding one other point. Tata dehantara prapti dhiras tatra muyati. At the time of death, you will acquire another body. The dhira, those who are undisturbed, they won't be bothered by this. That's what he's saying. Those who are spiritually fixed, they won't be fearful the way an animal is. They'll embrace that position. But then to your second question, that comes later in the Gita where he says, Yam yam vapi smaram babam tyajitante kalevaram tam tam evoite kontea sada tadbhava bhavitaha. Talks about whatever your consciousness is fixed upon at the time of death, that will provide the foundation for your next body. And there's two different schools of thought on this. One is literally what you're thinking at the time of death. The other is cumulative. Bhav, what's in your heart, what you've been all along. Because we know, maybe at the time of death, you'll be, how should we say, when your senses are not working, incapacitated. Like King Kulashekar, Prabhupada liked to sing this prayer of his, Krishna Tadiya Padapanga Japanjarantam Adyeva Vasutim Me Manasa Rajahamsa Pranak Prayama Samaye Kapabata Pittai Kantavaro Danavido Smaranam Kutaste. At the time of death, my lungs will be filled with mucus, my senses dislocated, I'm incapacitated. Said it may be very difficult to remember you at that time. So now, while I'm relatively healthy, saying, let the swan of my mind take shelter in the stem of your lotus feet. That's one prayer. And the Ishopanishad, Om Krita, Smaram Krita, Sloka, the devotee is praying, I may forget you at that time, but please don't forget me. That's also a possibility. But some examples are given in the Bhagavatam of, well, we just read about Prahlad in the 7th canto in the Shringa. So an example is given of the, what is that? There's two. One of Sahadev, you know this about the worm and the cocoon, who's thinking about their two things. They're obsessed and meditating in a particular way. It's mentioned there in terms of the transition, like a caterpillar. You know the movements of a caterpillar? It's on one leaf, and here's another leaf. And it puts part of itself on the next leaf, and then when it's situated there, it pulls the rest of its body onto the leaf. It's something like that, transiting from one life form to another. Many things are mentioned, right? But it's not like on the basis of a technicality that everything will be ruined, but rather Guru Maharaj supported the idea, your lifelong culture. When we say bhav, that word is best translated as heart. The sort of heart that you've evolved and developed over time will provide the basis for your next life.